Good everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So today I'll be talking about the large data volumes. So large data volumes plays a very important role when it comes to the Salesforce, especially from an architecture perspective, because the way you design your data, the data model will actually help to conquer the issues associated with the large data volume, right? So in saying that, right, you know, at times, when you are inheriting an org, you might, see an existing issue, which has been, building on for years. So, it may not be created by you, but it's be created by someone else, who perhaps, don't have a better understanding about the Salesforce architecture and decides to build, for the sake of, a specific problem and without having an overall picture. It happens most of the time, right? I've seen that. That's why I always suggest people when you work in the Salesforce space, think from an enterprise perspective. Don't think from your own project perspective, because that's a very short-sighted approach, right? So I'll be teaching this stuff from Trailhead because, like I said, right, I'm not a big fan of copying pasting the content to a slide. Slides are okay if I wanted to draw something, and or I prefer to use Jamboard if I have to draw something, but for this case, I don't see the need for it. And I encourage you to please read stuff from Trailhead. But I'm going to tell you the things based on my experience because I've done a lot of stuff around large data volumes and certain things which you can do to avoid it. And based on the stuff I've noticed, working at different places, right? And also I understand that this is more theory, and you might say, oh, okay, there's not much hands-on. Unfortunately, some topics, I can't demonstrate using hands-on, but it's very important to understand it because it will help you architect the system in a better way when you are, implementing a solution, right? Because you have to understand certain things before you even go and, start implementing it. Okay, so that's the interaction to this large data volume. Okay, so large data volume, right? When you hear about the large data volume, the first thing that comes to your mind, large volumes of data, right? So the large amount of data that resides inside the Salesforce. The first thing, okay, you might believe that, when you start implementing a Salesforce project, let's say you are migrating someone else to Salesforce, say 200 or 300 records, you may not believe at that stage, based on the forecasting that, you will not hit a million record mark. But, that's where most of the people does the mistake. Our business grows, right? And you'll be surprised in 2 years they are hitting a million, a million level record mark, right? And that's where the data issues started to kick in. The performance started to, slow down, and leading to poor user experience. So keeping that into consideration, right? So it's good practice to understand large data volume and the things which you can do to avoid it. The number one things, right? You have to plan your data model efficiently. That's the one thing, right? So imagine, right? You have if you plan your data model in a strange way, then you might hit the data skew. The data skew is a very commonly observed problem. It's like it's always associated with the record ownership. Okay, now imagine, right? You have a account. Okay, simple account, and you're creating a contact. Now, say for instance, for whatever reason, you have to create a contact, and you have decided to assign, the account to that contact, say an unassigned account, right? Let's say you have a whatever business need you have, and you have an account called unassigned accounts, and all the contacts, which specifically do not fit into any customer, you assign to that. Imagine, right, as the time grows, your records grows, right? If you have more than 10,000 contacts associated with unassigned accounts, rest assured you're hitting the data skew. And when that happens, right, performance will go down drastically, and it is not a good practice. So it's uh, it's mostly an architecture decision, in my opinion, and also a part of a business process, right? Both combines together because architecture is always associated with the business process, right? And then, based on the business process, you come up with a better solution. That's pretty much an architecture in a nutshell. Um, so if that happens, right, you have to work around the way to make sure that uh, specific contacts get associated with the different accounts instead of every contacts getting associated with the same account. That's one thing you can do, right? So that's exactly talking about the account data skew, right? And account data skew have another problem like record locking. So imagine, right, if you try to update a contacts, say for instance, 5,000 contacts in a multiple threads, and all these contacts, belong to your same account. Rest assured, you will hit record locking, and when that happens, things start to fail, right? And that's not really a good way to implement a solution, in my opinion, because it leads to wrong data, data inconsistency, and integrity of the data will be challenged, and at the same time affects the user experience as well. And sharing is another thing you have to keep into consideration because of this approach, right? What we're using, right? It will have an impact on sharing because it will, when the recalculation happens, right? It just, things go crazy at this stage. So, which is gonna consume massive amount of time. Okay, now there are two things you have to understand, right? Ownership skew, right? We talked about the data skew, right? Account skew. That's pretty much account data skew, which is a very common scenario, which happens in most of the places. That's one of the reasons why Salesforce explicitly mentioned this account data skew. Now, ownership skew is another thing where a large number of records belonging to the same object, right? Well, pretty much owned by a single user for whatever freaking bizarre reason, and this pretty much cause an ownership skew because in Salesforce, right, when you create a record, right, it should have an owner, right? So if you assign that owner to the same user, then it obviously going to lead to the ownership skew. I mean, you might say, oh, who could do that, right? You'll be surprised if you look at some of the orgs, right? I mean, at times I look at the Salesforce design, right? And I just sometimes wonder that, who architected it, right? Some of the Salesforce architecture sucks, done by people, perhaps someone who has no idea about architecture. So, they, on Salesforce architecture, I'm not saying, you know, they don't have any idea about how the architecture works. But even if you're not a Salesforce architecture, it's a common sense, right? To understand, right? To have a single user associated with, say 1 million ownership of the 1 million record pointing to a single user. That's a freaking uh, architectural uh, problem, in my opinion. And yeah, and it just very difficult when it comes to sharing calculation, right? Because of the visibility of these records. So this is a big problem. Another thing is the lookup skew, which is another thing. When a large number of records sorted with a single um, record in a lookup object, then it leads to the lookup skew. So if you wanted to know, have a look at it. I mean, you might say, "Oh, look, I haven't seen a lookup skew." Yeah, it may not necessary that you will encounter a scenario like that, but if you do, then you can understand, right? This is a problem, and you so these are the things I will expect you guys to look at it. If there's a massive performance issue, look at account data skew, ownership skew, lookup skew, right? If you find any of this thing, then you need to work around the way to figure out how to fix it, right? Okay, so this is about the problems or what I talked about, right? Problem associated with the large data volume. Now, if your company, right, use a static code analysis tool, right? There are a lot of static code analysis tools. PMD is one of them. My favorite is Clayton. It's a pretty amazing tool. It will figure out a lot of issues with your code. Large data volume is one of them. Security aspect. It's an amazing tool, right? You should check it out. Um, and So if your company uses such tool, right, then it's easy for you guys to, identify a large data volume issues before it hits the fan, right? You know what I mean? I don't want it to be rude. Then you're gonna say I'm swearing, so that's why I said hits the fan, right? So okay, so now, um, first of all, right, we talked about large data volume, which is great. Now, the large data volume, you can avoid it, right? You can use Salesforce Connect, right? So now, why I'm bringing Salesforce Connect to picture is if you don't want certain data to be brought into the Salesforce, you can obviously use Salesforce Connect. Now, again, that's an architecture decision, though, right? Like, say for instance, I'll give you a very classic example. You have a Salesforce and you have an order management system that's maintained at in SAP. Okay, now SAP is the or SAP, whatever you say, is the master record for order, right? There is no freaking need for for you guys to bring the data from SAP to the Salesforce and duplicate the information. You can use the data for viewing. I understand that the data is important for viewing. You can use Salesforce Connect. And that's where external objects comes in the picture, right? So this way you don't have to store a large amount of the data within the Salesforce. And when you don't have to store the large amount of data inside the Salesforce, obviously the performance won't be an issue. Okay. And when you don't have a performance issue, you will get a better user experience. When you have a better user experience, right? That means you have done a pretty good job. When you've done a pretty good job, your company will get a profit. When your company will get a profit, obviously you get a pay rise, right? And obviously when you get a pay rise, you can do more things with your money, or you can save, or you can invest, right? Right? You see the effect of a great work, right? A great a decision what you make. So everything around that get impacted, right? Even your manager performance, your user expectance, user experience, your company performance, everything get impacted by a single decision you make. So I mean, I'm just giving you from a Salesforce perspective, right? So you know, so and then you have lookups. So there are different lookups you can do. Um, you have external lookup, indirect lookup. So just read about it. It's just in the trailhead. So yeah, so this is the introduction to large data volume. So this is all I wanted to cover today. My apologies that it's more theoretical, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. You have to learn it, right? And if you don't learn this stuff, then you will end up in making a mistake, like I've seen a few people doing, right? And it's gonna impact user experience. Whenever a customer is involved, you have to pay special attention to customer experience. Otherwise, Salesforce is pointless, right? I mean, it's pointless to implement a Salesforce solution when you have to give a horrible user experience, right? So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover in this episode. I hope you guys have an amazing Saturday or Friday if you're in Europe, or Cook Island or wherever it is, right? So, adios.